So I recently just finished up Stellar Blade, and I know a lot of you probably have heard this game because of, well, obvious reasons. And this specific part of the game has generated 4 different crowds online. You got the normal people who are, just genuinely interested in playing a video game and can just appreciate a baddie within that game. You got the 2 sides of the usual pseudo-internet activists featuring, these people, as well as the "this game will finally end wokeness, yeah!" And the other final group of people, the showerless individuals who were starting petitions, boycotting, and refunding the game because the main character was 10% less exposed. Oh man.
Yeah, you might touch the finish line, but you've never touched a woman.
You're right! I haven't lost my virginity!
But this game is about more than just boobs, booty, and jiggle physics. Now, I wasn't expecting all that much from this game when I was buying it, because the trailers, they were like, I was like, okay, this kind of looks cool a little bit. And the developers had literally only made, like, mobile games before this one. But the combat and stuff looked pretty cool. So I said, why not give it a shot? And thank God I did, because this game genuinely became one of my favorite games that I've ever played. But before I start, I just wanted to let you all know, if you disagree with anything in this review and you would like to discuss your disagreements, I host a Disagreement Day stream on pretty much every weekend around 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, so make sure to slide over to those streams if you want to discuss any disagreements, and join my Discord, which will be in the description, to stay updated on when we start those streams. But without further ado, let's get into the first elements of the game that I want to talk about: the gameplay and the level design. But first things first, let's talk about the combat, because the combat in this game is absolutely fantastic. And while some people may argue that, certain parts of gameplay are better than others, the combat definitely comes close to being the best aspect of the gameplay. Right from the beginning of the game, you have access to a pretty wide variety of combos, 2 different beta skills, and 2 different items that you can use in combat. And as the game continues, you just constantly get more and more variety and depth within that combat system. And the game also gets more challenging, the longer you go on and the more you progress. Or at least from my experience. You have so many combo strings that you can string together with both beta and burst skill trees. And while I haven't personally played New Game Plus yet, you also get even more skills to unlock when playing through it. Another thing that's cool about New Game Plus is you get a whole new, harder difficulty, to play once you beat it. And sometimes I have a problem when games, lock harder difficulties behind a New Game Plus. But I feel like this game is challenging enough in the first playthrough for me to not be, having a problem with this. Another thing you have in the combat system is a gun, which you can also string into combat moves. However, my only issue with the combat system is this part of the combat, because it's a pretty easy way to cheese some boss fights. I personally didn't do this, but I have seen people do this. I don't know if this is a problem on the higher difficulty, but it is on the first playthrough from what I've seen and how people have cheesed these boss fights. Something that's also really good about the combat system, which strings into other gameplay elements like exploration, is the gear system in the game. This isn't a gear system that gives you just a bunch of random bullshit that you'll never use. You know what I'm talking about, the fucking, oh yeah, 10 plus chest armor, let's fucking go, man, yeah! It's not that kind of gear system. It's actually a gear system that limits you to 4 pieces of gear and 2 exospine slots, which you will progressively upgrade. And these can actually change your playstyle so it feels meaningful and it's not overcrowded. And the limit on the amount of gear that you can choose adds depth for the player to choose how you want to play. For example, by the final sections or the third act of the game, I had a build that was really heavy on damage output and energy buildup, but I took more damage in return for, making that build. Another thing I like is how both the beta and burst energy aren't tied to something like a cooldown, and I also think it's funny that they just have a mechanic in the game called beta energy. Probably another reason why some of these showerless individuals refunded the game. But anyways, what I liked about the whole energy stuff is how it's actually tied to hitting enemies, parrying attacks, as well as perfect dodges, and it makes it so that it encourages you to play more aggressively in combat, similar to Bloodborne, Sekiro, and Lies of P, which recently came out last year. And this is a good way to make people get better with perfect dodge and parrying, which apparently people need to, because I've seen quite a few people say that the parrying is inconsistent in this game. And I'm gonna be honest, I thought the same thing in the beginning of the game, but the better I got at the game, I started to notice it's just yeah, this is just a skill issue on my part, especially when you learn the enemy's attack patterns. And when you do start to master those perfect dodges and those perfect parries, whew, that shit is satisfying. Speaking of enemies, there's 48 different enemy types in this game, which features enemies like a cockroach with a shield. Just don't die. Am I fighting a cockroach right now? A cockroach with a shield?
I'm not the audience for this. A horse with a gun? Who is this for?
General Grievous, Hand-Faced Tiger, Ballsack Tiger, Edward Ballsack Hands. Well, that's one way to take down a monster, the good old 9/11 special. Starfish, Davy Jones, and of course the iconic villain, Tentacle. And I want to say something about the enemy designs, like on the visual front, that will segue me into level design. And that's simply that I've seen people say that the art direction isn't good because some of the varied locations and enemies don't feel like they fit in the game, or the locations and enemies feel like they could be in any game. So the game doesn't really have like a consistent art direction. And while I can kind of see, I guess, where this comes from, I don't agree. I think the variation within the environments and the enemies makes sense within the world that the game is set in. And since you're traveling to so many different parts of the world, that's another reason why I think it makes sense why a lot of this looks like very varied, and I actually like how varied the locations can look. However, one thing I will say is I think the more open levels, because there's like, you know, there's more linear levels and there's more open levels in the game, mostly being the wasteland and the Great Desert. Some of the areas in these zones can look a little generic at points, but now that brings me to the level design of the game. Now, I've already talked about the combat, but this game also features platforming, puzzles, and exploration, and this is just the perfect kind of level design and gameplay loop in my opinion. But I do want to criticize a bit of the execution of some of these elements. While I think overall the platforming sections are a good way to break up the gameplay loop, and there's a few of them that I found really neat and pretty fun, like this one with the PlayStation icons where you have to step on them in the right order for you to be able to like get across the gap. There was a section where you had to deal with these saw blades as well as like a fan that was pushing you, and I thought this one was pretty cool as well. There was a section with these lasers and you had to try and avoid them while you're like crossing this gap type thing, and then another one with lasers with like these crates and shit.
I'll handle it.
If you do that, they might find you.
Don't worry, Lily, I got this.
Oh no!
Wait, what did I do? Wait, no, hold on, bro. No. No, I mean, listen, we can talk about it. And this section was pretty funny for me. And then you had these two things where you like slide down like these massive tube slide things. One of them wasn't too challenging, but still pretty fun. But then there was another one that was pretty much like this for me. I'm like, Tony Hawk in this bitch, yeah. Okay, no, never mind. Okay, no, it's all good. It's all good. Okay, yeah, no, it's cool. Yeah, no, okay, yeah, okay. Yeah, okay, yeah, I get, no, yeah. No, it's okay, I get it. Bro, oh my, okay. Okay, alright, I get it. No, it's fine. Okay. What the fuck, dude? This section was really cool, and it also had like a dope-ass beginning to a boss fight. My only criticism with the platforming is that I just wish there was more of it, and I also wish it was more smooth, because at some points the animation makes it feel a little bit janky at points. I think something like Jedi Survivor, which has a really similar game design to this one, does platforming much better. To move on to puzzles, not all of them are good, I guess, but like there's a bunch of environmental puzzles that have like combat or platforming mixed within them, and not all of them are like the same, I guess, is a way I can describe it. Some of them are like mini games that vary and can get slightly more engaging as you progress throughout the game, and you'll get loot from these most of the time. And like as you explore through the more open levels, there will be like loot, boss fights, or lore that you have to do like explorative-esque puzzles to get to them. Granted, like I said, my only real small criticism is that some of the puzzles just really aren't challenging, but it's not a very puzzle-focused game, and it kind of just breaks up the gameplay loop, and it'll lead you to the more, you know, fun parts of the gameplay in a pretty fun way. So most of the time, it's not really a big deal when I have a problem with like any of these puzzles. And I really enjoy exploration in this game because of the things I mentioned earlier, like some of the platforming and puzzles mixed in with the rewards you get, like new outfits, and granted, some outfits are better than others. It should have been me for real. You also get lore, gear that can change your playstyle, skill points that enhance combat, cool combat encounters, boss fights. My only real slight issue with the exploration is the scan feature at points. I get why it's in there because the way the open areas are designed, it would be like pretty much impossible to find all the stuff. Granted, that doesn't necessarily mean all the stuff is easy to access at points, because you will have to figure out a way to reach a good amount of the rewards that aren't just like materials for upgrades or something. But I would have much rather preferred a design like Jedi Survivor where there's a map where you'll have like segmented parts telling you there's an item in a general area and you have to search for it on your own, instead of just being able to scan and seeing exactly where an item is. But still, overall, very minor gripes aside, I think the level design in this game is phenomenal. But what about the boss fights within these levels? Well, while I don't think they're the greatest thing in the world, I still think they are very good, especially in the third act of the game. The whole third act of the game in general is just the best on every level of the game's design in general, but I would say the best boss fight fights in the game are Gigas, Taki, both of the Belial boss fights, the like regenerator dude, the Karakuri boss fight, the Democrawler, the unidentified Natiba, Raven, and then the Mother Sphere like slash mech boss fight. And granted, while I think all these boss fights that I just listed are great, this boss fight specifically is simultaneously the most frustrating and rewarding feeling boss fight in the game, because when playing it, it pretty much felt like this.
I can't fucking compete! I just can't fucking compete! Can you get the fuck out of my face?
Oh my god, finally!
There's a hacking code on Iberis's memory stick.
So you just now figured that out, you stupid fucking child! And it felt like this because there is genuinely just some unfair bullshit that happens in the moveset of the boss. Like these stupid ass fucking lasers. Like you literally have to IRL move at light speed to react to these fucking things. I get there's like religious undertones to the story and shit, but I am not a god. But I guess dodging lasers, you know, feeling really quick, I guess that adds to the immersion factor, so, yeah, I don't know. But when Eve stops holding back, that, like, you know, like, when you finally actually beat the boss, you start to go crazy on this stupid bitch, and you get this dope-ass ending. But as far as the other bosses in the game, I think all of them range from, like, a 6 out of 10 to a 7 out of 10. But what's funny is a couple of these bosses are reused when exploring or doing side content, and they actually get more challenging, so I would probably raise the score for those. And normally I would criticize this kind of thing, like reused boss fights, but they did change up the bosses in a way, and they went from good to great, so it's not really a problem in my eyes, and I still enjoyed doing the boss fights. Now, if they were bad, it would be a different story, but they just weren't bad, so I had fun still. And I'd imagine in New Game Plus on a higher difficulties, all these bosses do get harder, so my opinion on this will probably change when I play New Game Plus. But yeah, overall, the bosses in this game were all good to great, and that brings us to the side content. And I honestly think the side content in this game is really good. Not just from the side mission perspective, but also just from the general explorative elements within it that I think can add to what you're doing outside of the main path. I'm not gonna get too deep into this and go through like literally every side mission, but I will say even the fetch quests within this game are made fun because of the gameplay loop. Most of the time a simple fetch quest will lead to a really good or unique combat encounter, some lore, some loot, and more progress towards upgrades. There were like 2 smaller bulletin board missions, which are like the, you know, kind of mostly the fetch quest stuff. But within these, you had like these 2 algebraic puzzles, and I had fun doing both of these. And there's multiple side characters within the world that also make it feel more alive. And granted, some of these side storylines can be like kind of surface level on a story perspective, but at the same time, there were multiple story quests where I was genuinely invested in the narrative. For example, I like the stuff with like this little girl and like the stuff, the side quest that you have to do with like finding the stuff for her sister, who, you know, you figure out is dead. The stuff with Digger, the robot, who gained consciousness, and you gotta like try and help him find the mystery of his consciousness. You can find this guy who gives you like access to fishing, which is a fun fishing mini game within itself. And he's kind of just like a semi-interesting character. He's like a broken man with nothing really left to live for except for fishing, and that's like all he does. So it's kind of tragic, and it kind of adds to like, you know, the atmosphere of the world. There's this couple that you find, and you have like this is like a whole quest line where you help this woman fix her body up, and eventually this leads to her husband going off on his own to like fix her legs, and he almost gets himself killed trying to help her, and you have to save him. Again, this is something that I think really adds to the atmosphere and world and like the people within the world. And then there's another guy who spends every cent that he has like desperately trying to like find a bunch of teddy bears because he put his like little sister who died's memory cell in a teddy bear, and he lost that teddy bear, so he spent his whole life going broke buying a bunch of teddy bears. This shit was pretty sad. And there's a few other side quests I could mention. But again, even if I wasn't too interested in any of the narrative elements of any of these side quest lines, the gameplay would still always more than make up for it. But while we're on the topic of narrative elements, now let's talk about the main narrative and the atmosphere of the world. I've already talked a bit about some of the stuff in the side content that I found interesting narratively, but I've seen quite a few people claim that this game has a weak story. And I can agree to some extent, but when I started writing this review, I was gonna like, you know, maybe go at some of the criticism, but I genuinely don't even care that much to talk that much like in depth about the narrative. Even if I did agree that the overall narrative was like bad, it wouldn't really affect my rating all that much either way, because one, this isn't even much of a story focused game. 90% 80% of the game will be spent in gameplay and all the cutscenes are skippable. And 2, I don't even factor story that much into ratings of my game anyways. Granted, that is context dependent on the type of game that I'm playing, but most of the time I'm not playing Telltale games, so it's like whatever. Anyways, here's all I'll say in regards to what I think is good and bad about the story without getting too deep into it. First, the voice acting and dialogue. This is 100% the worst aspect of this game's narrative. The voice acting is not good, to say the least, for like most of the game. I don't think it's like the worst voice acting I've ever heard or anything, but it's definitely very mid. Literally everyone in this game sounds like robots. Now I guess you could say that was a stylistic choice because, you know, they literally are all robots. However, I have a counterpoint. That's the counterpoint. But for the dialogue, it's weird to me because on one hand, I think, you know, some of the dialogue is good for the most part, or just fine for the most part. But on the other hand, the line delivery just makes pretty much every line of dialogue seem like so flat. But that's also not to say that there isn't bad dialogue in this game.
So, where do we go?
No time for breaks. Typical Eve.
I just met you. What the fuck do you mean, typical Eve?
Angel, lovely to meet you.
You don't seem very likable.
All right, you're pretty sharp.
What the hell was that interaction?
Adam, what is this?
Don't you know this already? It's a map.
How do you synchronize the location on the map?
Okay, just don't tell me, I guess.
How dull.
Let's go to the fact that he is gay. He is a gay man. He can deny it all he wants. He's a homosexual person.
A doll without an owner.
It's old, but it smells nice.
What a curious thing to say.
The fuck? I'd say the best voice performance here was the girl who voiced Lily. She seemed to be the only one who gave a fuck through the voice recording process. To talk about the character writing real quick, I think there's like a couple interesting prominent characters. Adam for the whole story is a nothing burger of a character until like the ending.
What are you doing? What are you doing?
Nothing. Me? Just hanging around.
But the ending, granted, that is pretty interesting. The little plot twist, the little plot reveal. Eve is very bland. They do very little to do much with her character to make her compelling. Lily is probably the best character in the game, or at least the one that gets somewhat the most depth explored throughout the main story. Not to say it's got a lot of depth, but at least there's something there. Raven, Oracle, and Mother Sphere I thought were all good characters. This game also features Man.
Who are you?
Oh, this here is Man.
But there might be something up with Man.
Yeah, that scary-looking guy wouldn't stop staring at me.
Now pay attention, Pimpin'. Pay attention, Pimpin'. You're a pedophile. Prove me wrong. You're a pedophile. Prove me wrong.
But overall, the character writing is just, meh. But to move on to the plot and world building, I will say the world building, atmosphere, and plot twists / like revelations that you find throughout the course of the game are really interesting and well done. Some of the plot points can feel kind of predictable, but I was always surprised with the execution of the plot points. Like at the ending of the game, the choice to fuse with Adam or not, I was sitting there for like 5 minutes just thinking like, damn. I don't really have any issues with the plot or world building in the game, and I think if they make a sequel to this game and make the characters like more interesting, the next game will genuinely have a phenomenal story. But for right now, I think the story overall is just like a 5, maybe 6 out of 10. And that brings us to my final thoughts on the game as a whole. Overall, this game hits pretty much everything except its story at a very high level, and I was having a blast the whole time I played this game. I of course have a few tiny issues, and my biggest issue would be the story, but again, this isn't really a story-focused game. But overall, if I was to put my overall enjoyment aside, I give this game like a 9 out of 10. But if you factor in my personal feelings and enjoyment, it's a 10 out of 10. Just a reminder, if you disagree with anything said in this video, make sure to stop by the Disagreement Day streams. If you enjoyed this video, I would appreciate it if you would support me on Patreon. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and yeah.